Greetings and welcome to the Mount Rushmore podcast. My name is Jeff, and I'm joined as always by my good friends Richard.
Hello.
And Michael.
Howdy.
Richard and Michael like to debate and deliberate the Mount Rushmore, a variety of topics. But this week they have a challenger from the outside. It is a gentleman who we are grateful that he listened to one episode of the podcast and made a suggestion as a topic. The gentleman is Vince Pagano. How are you, sir?
Doing well. How are you, Jeff?
Real good. Could you please tell us and the audience what was the topic that you suggested, and tell us why you suggested it?
The topic that I suggested to you guys was the spirit of sports pantheon, the top four, or I should say the Mount Rushmore of athletes who could be successful in any era of their respective sport.
Hey, that's a really cool topic. What inspired that? I imagine you're just a general sports fan, but was there something that kind of spurred on that question?
Tell you the truth, I mean, when I listened to the controversial wrestling angle one, I thought to myself, wow, and I know you guys are very well versed. I forgot specifically who was the referee who did that, which one of you, whether it was Richard or Michael. But I realized when I listened to it, there was one that was missed completely, and it was the Brian Pillman angle where he pulled out the gun on Stone Cold. And I say that because, and again, I know all those angles that were discussed were great, but I thought to myself, wow, here I am debating without even talking to you guys. So, in spirit of what was talked about, I was like, well, what a greater thing to debate as a guy than sports. And that was only validated a day after I suggested it to somebody else. I said, hey, we're doing, I guess, on this podcast. And of course, my buddy came at me with his four and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, wow, what have I done? So the floodgates are open, and I'm glad to be part of the rush of sports, sports talk here.
All right, cool. Well, let's jump right into it. Why don't we have you start out with your first choice of an athlete that could excel in any era of this athlete's respective sport?
Okay. Well, I stuck to the four major ones that we know: basketball, baseball, football, hockey. And to be frank with you, basketball is not my strong point, but there's one that specifically, one player specifically who stood out to me since he started playing, and that's LeBron James. I don't think I've ever, me personally, have ever bore witness to an athlete where maybe Tiger Woods, because it was expected that he was going to be the greatest. But LeBron James, I remember he came to where I grew up in New Jersey. He came to a town called Trenton to play their high school team. And my buddy Tony, he goes and says, hey, we're taking my son. We're going to see him. I was hoping the next words out of his mouth were, you want to come with me? But I couldn't. He didn't have tickets to a high school game. Imagine that in New Jersey. Wow. It's not a big deal. And he came back, and I thought he saw the second coming. And that's not what he was telling me. And in regards to basketball, yeah, probably. There's not too much of a stats geek. I wish my brother was here to run it all through. But just to be brief, in 1,258 regular season games, at the age of 35, LeBron James is third all-time on points list behind Karl Malone and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. To me, that's something that's easily going to be achievable. It's not even a question. I'm a big consistency and versatility, and just and there's all kinds of, you find all kinds of numbers. You kind of was the different eras in which he played in his own career. His first run in Cleveland, his regular season stats, 27.8 points per game, 7 rebounds, 7 assists. These are all averages. Playoffs pretty much consistent. His Heat era, 26.9, about 7.5, almost 7 assists per game, and then almost 7 assists per rebounds per game. So he's running like a 27-7 stat line. He goes back to Cleveland, does like a 26-8-8 stat line. And back here, his first season in Los Angeles, where he was even injured the first season, I believe, and then still going, 26-8 and almost 9 assists per game. We can go on and on about him. Again, I'm not a numbers geek, but I look at a guy, like I said, who is built, essentially to play all 5 positions. Something that was brought to my attention by same friend of mine who said, I think this guy can play anywhere on the court, and he can. I don't know if he's ever been called to play center. I remember Magic Johnson was at one point, in his career. That kind of blew my mind. The idea of Magic Johnson playing center.
Yeah, the 81 NBA Finals against the 76ers. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So I mean, I guess you can say he actually has played the position. But just when I look at a guy like LeBron, and can kind of like in encapsulating, to me, he's a guy who can play all 5 positions. Just built to last. I could see Zion Williamson becoming that guy, in this next era. So these guys, what do they come around about every 15 or 20 years, who can come in and pretty much play all 5 positions and dominate with a consistent stat line with the expectation of greatness. So to me, you put him back in any era, I could see him dominating, the 70s, 80s, the Jordan era easily. And so I give it up to you guys.
I love the idea of him excelling in the 1950s or 40s. I don't know when did Dr. Naismith create the game, but the idea of tossing a leather ball up in a peach basket and just killing it sounds pretty awesome. Was the game? Was there any contemporary athlete who could not have handled the rigors of the game in its inception? Is there something about the game as it was many years ago in its inception that you think a contemporary athlete wouldn't be well suited for?
I mean, my question is, can he, put the ball in the basket granny style consistently? Yeah. Like before they started shooting overhand, before they started, doing jump shots even.
Yeah, do they have does he have a set shot? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, can he just stand there and just do the 1, 2, 3 underhand and then it's in the basket?
Yeah. And after the training table meal of a bowl of chili and some codeine or something, whatever they
and half a pack of Marlboros, Chesterfields.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing about LeBron
until we get to baseball, I'm going to call.
Yeah. The one thing about LeBron,
William James on the Roto World. Anyway, sorry.
No, it's okay. With LeBron, he is involved in so many endeavors, in his kind of personal business life that very much harkens back to a guy that played basketball part-time and then ran a car dealership or also worked at the factory. So, in theory, he could have done he does do multiple jobs just like the guys did back in the 50s and 60s where it was just kind of a part-time thing.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's a great, Vince. Thank you so much, A, for suggesting this topic, B, getting on our podcast, and C, coming out strong with that first choice of the King James. So Richard Manfredi or Michael Winfield, you got to respond in kind.
I guess I can go first, Michael, if that's okay.
Sure. Why don't you stay in basketball at least?
Well, stay in the basketball, stay in my free throw lane here.
Yeah.
And I'm going with a Kansas Jayhawk.
Whoa!
One that is not Jeff Hopkins, although I do not know what your basketball skills are.
Is this a Wilt Chamberlain?
This is Mr. Wilt the Stilt.
Mr. the Stilt. Cool.
The Big Dipper.
Right
Wilt
on.
Chamberlain. Yeah, he was. I think when Michael and I were looking at this topic, we were definitely thinking of players from past generations who I think would be able to play in the modern game. And I don't know that there's anyone in kind of basketball history pre-modern era that is more suited to be able to play in today's game than Wilt Chamberlain. He was 7'1" and 275 pounds, but he moved like a power forward. Could play defense, could play offense, could run. They actually had to change basketball laws because of him. In college basketball, they made the dunk illegal because he was so adept at dunking the basketball that it was almost impossible to stop him. They also had to stop him from just throwing the ball at the backboard for a free throw and then just running and grabbing it and throwing it in, because that was his one flaw, was he wasn't a great free throw shooter. But I think in today's game he can still work around that. I mean, the man averaged 30 points and 20 rebounds. He was the only player in NBA history to do that, and he did that 7 times in his career. In fact, he actually averaged 30 points and 20 rebounds for his entire career, and no one else has done that even once in a season. So I think that, on top of that, look, if you can sleep with 20,000 women, in the 60s, you're going to be fine with whatever modern day groupies are throwing at you. And if I can be serious for a second, I always kind of thought that's probably in a lot of ways the worst thing that happened to Wilt Chamberlain's legacy, just as a basketball player. Obviously, legacy is other things, that's different. But unfortunately, as soon as I mentioned Wilt Chamberlain, you guys listening out there knew I was going to make a he had sex with 20,000 women joke. And I think it just takes away from what a amazing athlete he was and how much he was just different than the other basketball players of his era. His athletic ability for his size was something that we just had never seen from big men before. So he absolutely could go against, whatever your modern day center that you want to compare him against today. He would have been dominant.
Mm-hmm. That's a cool choice. Not just because I'm a Rock Chalk Jayhawk KU alumnus. It does seem like Wilt himself does kind of bridge the old game and the new game, or kind of an image of modernity, the contemporary athlete emerging, and almost like somebody who was already in the NBA, even in the college game. It felt like.
Yeah, in the 60s, when you watch some of those old game films of him in the 60s, it just looks like a player from a different era. It looks like somebody from like the 80s got dropped in to a 60s game, and the players from the 60s have no fucking idea how to cope with him. It's just chaos trying to deal with him.
Yeah. All right, Vince, what is your second choice, sir?
Well, my dad's a diehard Giants fan. And so the idea of suggesting Ray Lewis is the greatest, is like suggesting, giving your dog a salad for dinner. So it didn't go over too well initially. But he respected where I came from. It just cost me about 8 minutes of my life listening to him talk about the greatness of Lawrence Taylor. And I love you, Dad, but, but anyway, as far as I was getting into the stats, just to 28 career games, about 2,050 tackles, had 41.5 sacks, 19 forced fumbles, 19 fumble recoveries, 31 interceptions, and a stat that always gets me as an old linebacker, pass deflections, 119. He played the idea of a traditional linebacker, a tight end. I shouldn't say before, like when Gronk came in, I was like, 2010, before that, other guys came in, when I think of tight ends, the way that tight ends would be covered. But ultimately a traditional middle linebacker. And to me, the thing that always captured me about his style of play was he was just a clean tackler. I say clean, not so much when he would, rip a guy's head off, playing him. I remember his MO was, I think it was against a guy in San Francisco, or it might have been Tampa, where he tackles the guy and goes, you can't stop me, I'm a machine, jerk. And I think from that moment on, as a human being, I was just, the idea of playing him would be, like if you were going to get drafted, in the NFL, what team am I going to? Oh, the Cincinnati Bengals. Like, oh God, I got to play Ray Lewis twice a year. Just that sort of ideology. And granted, Lawrence Taylor carried that, but in spirit of talking about Ray Lewis, just a few, and I don't know how far you guys have watched football necessarily. I assume, I know Jeff, you've talked about, not being a big sports guy, but to give you perspective, if you look up Darren Sproles, Ray Lewis, it was a 4th and 2, week 3 of the 2010 or something like season, or 2009 season, where he on 4th and 2, Sproles gets the ball and Ray Lewis just jacks him up the middle with a clean shot. And one of the keynote interceptions of his career, where Eddie George catches the ball in the flat and he just essentially steals it from him and then runs it back, and that cements their trip to Super Bowl 35. And granted, other players have had other highlights too, but the main fixed point that I feel that Ray Lewis would allow Ray Lewis to succeed in any era is that he played a traditional 3-4 middle linebacker, and just his style of tackling, his ability to go sideline to sideline and play the game that way. Especially how the game is played now with much more open space up the middle, would almost give him free reign versus you might say a pass rusher, who, with the way penalties are called now, especially on quarterbacks, there is not as much leeway or wiggle room. Sometimes you see calls and you just grab your hat. You're like, oh my God, I can't believe the ref called that. That's just my, again, my perspective on, who I feel would fit in any era of football. So.
Hey, cool choice. Gentlemen, do you have any response?
Yeah, no, I like this pick. I mean, I think that the Lawrence Taylor versus Ray Lewis debate is a very valid one. I think physically, Lawrence Taylor would have been able to play in this era. There's no question about that. All of the physical attributes are there. Is there a need for a linebacker who kind of lines up as a down lineman? Maybe not as much in today's era as there is for a middle linebacker. And also, Ray Lewis would murder somebody in any era. Let's keep that in mind.
Jesus.
Murder is murder is murder. I mean, I'm sorry. Be an accomplice to murder.
Okay.
Allegedly.
Alleged. So, guys, let us know your second choice.
Our second choice is when I was thinking of this, I was thinking going backwards mostly, like who was a more recent player that could have played, back in the day. And I thought, well, how far back do you want to go? So I thought of baseball, and I thought, who would have been the player that would have dominated in the current era, and then 20 years ago, and then from the 1890s. And then I thought Randy Johnson, MLB pitcher, known as a big unit because he was 6'10" and killed birds, while he was pitching.
Unlike Ray Lewis, there's no doubt about this one.
Yeah, he owned up to it. He went over 300 games and pitched a perfect game and a no-hitter and was a World Series MVP champion and, had a 100-mile-an-hour fastball. Pitched for 22 years and, just had, a great mustache. And I figured, if he was playing in, the 1890s, he would have, a great mustache then, too. And I think that was just what you kind of looked for. You looked for this guy that was just this massive presence that threw as fast and as hard as anybody, and then maybe also doubled in the freak show in the off season. In the winter months he traveled with a circus. I think he would have fit right in, no matter dead ball era or present day. And I think he's one of those kind of for being so dominant. I think he's kind of underrated for being how good he was. I think everyone is so quick to kind of look to see who the most current best baseball player is that they forget this guy that, pitched for 20 years and was amazing for 20 years. It wasn't like he had maybe his last year he kind of lost some stuff with the Giants, but I don't know. I think he is a guy that would have been amazing no matter what year he played or whether we're wearing knee socks or not.
Michael, to your point, you talk about the lore, the lore of a player. To me, baseball is, these conglomeration of stories and that lore of Randy Johnson growing up back east. We always heard about him, didn't see too much until he came to the Yankees. But if you remember the All-Star game, I think it was 96, I'm probably off, but when he threw against John Kruk and almost took his head off, and that was a complete accident. They both looked at each other oh, no problem. And then the next swing, John Kruk, he does a spin-a-rooney, 720 or whatever, and he swings and he's just get me the hell out of here. The idea of going up against Randy Johnson in an All-Star game could be hazardous to your health, let alone a real game. So very good choice. I agree with the idea of a 6'10" guy with a big mustache. Just the idea of going up against him, oh God, I guess wrestling the Legion of Doom. Great, I gotta deal with these guys tonight and get my ass kicked.
He kind of just looked like a big mean son of a bitch too, and just that's just appreciated in baseball, no matter whether it's the 60s or the 40s or the 20s or when they first invented it. So
yeah, agree.
Yeah, he does seem like a guy who a comic artist could make a good baseball cartoon out of.
Like a caricature,
a caricature. Yeah.
It's funny you say cartoon. I just watched there was a ZZ Top documentary on Netflix. And,
that's
Billy
great.
Billy Bob Thornton, I forget the name off the top of my head, but Billy Bob Thornton talked about he's man, it's kind of like if ZZ Top rolled up into your neighborhood. It'd be like if Bugs Bunny showed up.
Yeah.
And when you think of baseball and characters, if the Bugs Bunny correlation could be anybody, it would probably be Randy Johnson. I totally agree with you. Hey, what's up, Doc? And I'm going to just strike you out and get a combination of that and Kowalski, get off my lawn.
Yeah.
Plus, Yeah, plus he had the 100-mile-per-hour fastball, plus that one pitch that kind of just looped over and over, so they swung at it 3 times in the one pitch. Yeah. Just like Bugs Bunny. It was the exact same pitch.
I never thought of that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I forgot Bugs did play baseball for a period
I could
of time.
see a sports agent back then thinking, I can make a lot of money from the mustache wax or snuff distributors of America with this guy sponsoring. But I got a great iodine sponsorship for you, Randy. Okay, so we are at our halftime, and this is such a fun topic, and I'm excited to get to the second half, but want to take this moment to invite whoever's ears are receiving this podcast on whatever platform to join us in our social media discussions that happen out on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. Others have, and they are currently on this podcast. Vince Pagano reached out and commented and made a suggestion, and now he's talking with us, and it's been a lot of fun to actually get in dialogue with some of our listeners in real time. So please go out there and suggest a topic. If you download, rate, and review and listen to past episodes, you could evaluate them and determine which argument we should have made that we didn't. So that's another reason to go back and listen to some past episodes. We really appreciate it. And I think with that, we're going to get back into our third round of the Mount Rushmore of athletes who could have excelled in any area of their sport with Vince Pagano's third choice.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jeff. And again, thank you for having me, guys, as well. The third choice that came to be here was the easiest for me. I say that with confidence because it's been approved by everybody I've mentioned it to before I got here. So validation's fun. But it was, you might know him. He's an Oakland Athletic, but it's not McGuire or Canseco. He was an Athletic, a Yankee, a Dodger, a Met. I think he played for, the Albuquerque Isotopes. Rickey Henderson. Rickey Henderson of the modern baseball era. You talk about a character. I'm sorry, you're going to say something?
I was just going to say the greatest leadoff hitter of all time. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big believer in versatility and efficiency. I'm 5'8", 180 pounds if I'm lucky. I'm grateful to be 180 pounds. And so the idea of the greatest leadoff hitter in history, kind of in that range. He wasn't the biggest guy, but he can move. And I never played ball the way, I never played in high school or anything like that. But if I was going to play baseball like anybody, to me, it would be like Rickey Henderson. 1,406 stolen bases. And next in line from there is Lou Brock. And Lou Brock had 938. I know today's modern baseball game, there's not as many steals or steal attempts. It's not as big of a thing, or it was even frowned upon. But I still see guys like Billy Hamilton and other guys try to steal bases. To me, Rickey Henderson.
Don't drown out Juan Pierre, please.
Oh, I forgot about him, and then Jose Reyes, and so and all those guys all put together. But to me, the idea of a guy who could take a 3-2 count and turn it into a run. I know there's so many statistics, and I'm not going to start rattling them off because I don't do well with numbers, but I do well with what I see and what I saw growing up, because those games were actually televised, those A's games, by me. When they played the Yankees, when they played other teams, it was amazing. I mean, time stopped on my block, when Rickey Henderson was on TV. The stats can tell you so many things, the idea of steals, but also the thing, being a guy who played left field when I did play, and I played, like rec league softball recently, left field. It could be a real pain in the butt, with all the right-handed power hitters and guys wanting to kill it. There's one statistic defensively that really popped out at me was putouts as a left fielder. The all-time leader is Barry Bonds, 5,225. Next is Rickey Henderson, 5,215. And the guy below him is a guy named Zach Wheat, who I don't know. Maybe he's in a rock band, but 4,990. So roughly, a few hundred more, and then the next guy is Luis Gonzalez, 4,442. So there's massive amounts of separation between Rickey Henderson and a whole lot of other guys with putouts. So to say he was fast would be an understatement. Again, we could talk about metrics and stuff like that, but some things that always captured me about him was just how, again, in that spirit of that Bugs Bunny cartoon character-esque kind of lore, he had some funny quotes. One of the stories was he used to kill everybody playing poker on the road. And he would do that by counting cards. And one of his quotes was, I think playing cards gave me the opportunity to relax in the game. So I know that I started playing poker late in life then. One of the and I'll leave it with this, where when he got his first place in New York when he played against the Yankees, I don't know if you heard this story, where he goes, I got a new place. I forgot who he said it to, but he goes, I can see over at the Empire State Building. That's a true story.
The entire state building.
The entire state building. But yet, I say that because he acknowledged he wasn't always the smartest guy, but I disagree. I think he's one of the smartest guys to ever play the game because of his efficiency to just get on base and steal. And I know I said I'd lay off the stats, but I think it was 1990, and there was when he had his 130 stolen bases. I forgot whatever year that was. That same year, he stole third base 30. I think it was up to a certain point, like August 1st. He had stolen third base 32 times or 33 times. The Minnesota Twins team at that point had 32 stolen bases collectively as a team.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I mean, again, I disagree. I think he's one of the smartest guys to ever play the game, one of the most efficient guys, and one of the most versatile guys to ever play the game, and to play the game for 25 years at a high level, from A's to Dodgers and everything in between. I just think he's probably, drop him in any era and he's good to go.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, you just kind of described him almost as the opposite of Randy Johnson, not a like the strongman at a circus sideshow, but this kind of stealthy, average, very athletic person. So he is the
screwsman that goes in and makes the wax impressions of the keys to get into, just break into the hangman's box and then make off with the robbery.
Rickey Henderson once fell asleep with an ice pack on his foot and wound up getting frostbite and missing 3 games.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
The stories continue.
I bring this up because I would have personally loved to see a 50s or 40s or whatever era manager have to be told that your star left fielder has frostbite and can't play. Just to be a fly on the wall in that conversation would have been fantastic.
My favorite baseball conversation ever probably is Jimmy Dugan talking to Evelyn in League of Their Own. When he goes, Roger Hornsby, or my parents came down all the way from Michigan, and Roger Hornsby called me a big pile of shit. And like he said, I can imagine the conversation what that would have been.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, guys. Boy, Vince sure has some great choices. What do you got for your third?
All right, so our third choice, and I know Vince, you're sticking with the big 4 sports. I think with one of our picks at least, we're going a little bit off the grid, not too far. But we're going with the greatest soccer player / Crestfield wax paper spokesperson of all time. And, of course, I'm talking about Pele. Pele is the official goal-scoring record holder. He scored in official and unofficial competition 1,281 goals in 1,363 games. So he basically almost averaged a goal a game. Just a ridiculous amount of goals. He won 3 World Cups with Brazil and probably would have won a 4th in '66 if he hadn't gotten injured. And I follow soccer. Right now there's the debate between Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi, who's the greatest player of their generation. And it's amazing to me that you've got these 2 generational talents. And at no point does the conversation even start to go to, are either of these 2 better than Pele? Because that's just not a conversation that's worth having. It's just automatically assumed that Pele is the gold standard for soccer players. And I think it's amazing that he did this in an era when they didn't have yellow cards and red cards for fouls. If you got fouled, it was just, all right, you get the ball right there and let's keep going. And it doesn't matter if half of your leg got hacked off by somebody's shin. Nope, just keep on going. I mean, he was fouled. If you go on YouTube, there is a video compilation of fouls against Pele. And guys are basically literally just kicking him in the shins as hard as they can and stomping on him and clotheslining him practically and just doing all of this, whatever physically they could do, because he was just too quick and too skilled. He was 5'8", but yet he was still one of the best headers of the ball in the world because he had such incredible hops. And I just think,
Richard, I have a, sorry to interrupt. I have a quick question for you.
yeah, absolutely.
Have the rules outside of yellow cards and red cards, have the rules of the game changed that much from when Pele played to to current rules?
Not necessarily.
This is something that I'm interested in because baseball's the same way. The rules really haven't changed in 150 years or 120 years, aside from adding like game clocks and other nonsense. But when someone can dominate in their time, and that was 60 years ago or 50 years ago, and then what it would be like today, I think that would be interesting. Do you think I guess everything that he would do would translate?
I think everything he would do would absolutely translate. He was far and away the quickest player of his era. And I'm making a distinction between being fast, what you would be able to measure in a 40 time, versus being quick. And I think quickness is something that I think transcends eras more than pure straight line speed does.
Like Rickey Henderson, who was just kind of quick.
Yeah, exactly.
And fast.
He was quick and fast. I think that in terms of the rules, some of the rules changed. Like I said, the yellow cards and red cards made a big difference in cutting down on the egregious just fouling to try to hurt somebody, essentially, or slow them down. You also are now allowed substitutes during the game. You're allowed 3 substitutes, where back in Pele's day, you had to play the full 90 minutes every game. So there was no opportunity for him to play 70 minutes, be up 4-1, and then they bring somebody else in to give him a rest for the final 20 minutes. No, if you started, you were out there for 90 minutes, and he played 90 minutes every game, even when he was hurt. Very well known for his playing through pain.
Was there an era of soccer where passing was determined to be statistically essential to scoring points? I remember listening to a podcast where some guy had determined that the best way to score was to just pass a lot until you get into, it seems kind of fundamental, but was Pele a kind of guy who would just kind of drive it himself into the goal?
No, he was somebody who was definitely could drop back from being a forward to back to the midfield to get the ball and then make passes to help his teammates out. And that's something with those Brazilian teams from the 60s that won all those World Cups. Yeah. They were the first team to really specialize in the quote-unquote beautiful game versus just lobbing the ball 60 yards downfield and hoping somebody gets a head on it or somebody's able to get a foot on it, and that kind of monotone sort of style of play where everyone just kicked the ball as far as they could and went to go see what, if they could make something happen if they got close to the goal. So absolutely, I think those Brazilian teams, and Pele in particular, were absolutely influential in what we consider to be modern soccer strategy.
Mm-hmm. I think of him as the very dynamic, charismatic character that I first met in the film Victory with Stallone and Michael Caine.
Yeah.
Michael Caine trying to pretend to be a good soccer player was pretty great. But
the British guy couldn't be as good of a soccer player as the American Stallone, who's about 5'3", trying to play goalie.
Yeah. Fun choice, Pele. All right. This is passing the ball back to Vince for your fourth and final selection of athletes who have been outstanding in their sport in any era.
Okay. Thank you guys again. And I do appreciate you guys bringing up Pele. I did think of him, but I definitely don't know much about him. So it was good to learn. The fourth one, though, I have to held to a different standard. Jerry, if you're listening to this, you'll love the pick. I stick to hockey. I grew up playing the sport. So if there's anything I should know, it's knowing hockey, especially when the era this particular player played. In the 1990 draft, he was taken 5th overall, and when he retired, he was the only one left in that class. That would be Jaromir Jagr, right wing from the Czech Republic. As one of my buddies out here, a buddy of mine who I got to know, my buddy Michael, we used to joke around and call him, the Czech Republic's, he's their chosen son. The NHL has changed so much. Just since I've been alive, let alone the eras prior, and how, if there's any sport I think that has changed and grown, and when I say grown, the game has become more open, and, as we see, especially the European influx that has come into the NHL. when those floodgates opened up back in the early 80s with the Red Wings and such, allowing when Russian players were able to come in, then the game really opened up. So Jaromir Jagr was taken 5th overall by the Pittsburgh Penguins back in 1990. Just some stuff about him, career stats wise. He has 766 goals, 1,155 assists for a total of 1,921 points, second behind Gretzky. Of those goals, 135 of them are game-winning goals. So almost 10% of the goal, or roughly 8% of the goals he scored were game-winning. 15 30-goal seasons, 4 Art Ross scoring titles, and the list goes on. I can go on and on. The thing that always captured me about him, again, Dad, if you're listening, you get more props in this than I ever gave you. I started working out when I was 12, Jeff, surprisingly. I just haven't been consistent. And I remember being in the gym where we were working out, and my dad showed me how to do squats. And I was about 12 years old at the time, going, yeah, whatever. And he goes, you know who does 1,000 of these a day? I said, who? He goes, Jaromir Jagr. And I thought to myself, well, if I did the math correctly, I'm 12, and if he started doing when he was 7 at 1,000 a day, I'm about 1 million and such behind. So I got some catching up to do. I don't think I've caught up since. I don't care how many you've seen me do, Jeff. And so Jagr, and he's got a lot of players about Jagr. If you look back into, like, I think it's Anatoly Isimov who invented what is now modern, laid the groundwork for what is modern hockey training, dry land, stuff that you and I have done, Jeff, for different kind of training.
Oh, yeah.
You'll look into that. It's the same kind of thing that Jaromir Jagr does when he wants to. I don't know about you guys. I got to get up and work in the morning. I'm going to work out at 12:30, and do 30-second sprints with a 35-pound vest on me. But he does. And the running joke is that he was every trainer's worst nightmare, because the amount of the volume of training and the way he trained required 24/7 care, and I had the article up, but it was essentially some fun stuff where most recently, when he was in Calgary before he retired, but Florida, his trainer, he and his trainer would train at different hours, different times, 2 a days when game day, 3 a days when there was no game. He would take an 8-pound medicine ball and whack it against the wall with a hockey stick. Again, that's taking with his hockey stick, whacking an 8-pound medicine ball. I shoot a hockey puck and I feel winded. So things like that, the Jagr lore of all the different training and things he would do. And I think all of that compounded into all the things that you can read about him and learn about him. But as far as dropping into any era, when I think of Bobby Orr, I think of a guy who I originally was going to pick. He changed the game as far as how a defenseman plays. The idea of coming into the ice, not liking what he sees, comes back. Maybe there's a line change. Maybe there's that definitely changed the game. But Bobby Orr played 10 seasons, 2 of them on bad legs, and the 2 of them were kind of sad at the end with Chicago. So he didn't have that fight off injuries. But I think of the 3 years he played with Omska Avangard, I think is the team in the Czech Republic, where pretty much he put up the numbers that would have put him in the record books as the all-timer. So from age 18 to 48, he was cranking. And only 2 more guys above the age of 45 ever played an NHL game, and that was Chris Chelios and Gordie Howe. So to say he's in good company would be an understatement. But again, the groundwork's there as far as the training, and his ability to sustain that longevity is why I would pick him as a guy you could drop into any era and play the game of hockey.
Well, that's a cool pick. You guys are, Richard or Michael, you guys hockey followers or fans?
Yeah.
To what extent?
I dabble. Yeah.
Do you think this, so learning about do you think his training style came from the Czech Republic? Do you think it comes from this kind of the very Spartan and very challenging climate or training conditions that one might encounter when they begin in that environment? Obviously, he started, you said, when he was 7 years old. Does he seem like a product of that upbringing and just kind of continued it even after he encountered American hospitality and all that stuff?
When I think of Jaromir Jagr, I think of I don't think of someone who is sort of like the East European, no personality type. I think he was, in my mind, one of the things I think about with him is he was one of the first Eastern European players to come into the NHL and really be like a popular figure within the sport, and someone who was sort of beloved by fans around the sport and not just by whoever was on their own team.
Mm-hmm.
So I think of someone like Alexander Ovechkin today, and I look at Jaromir Jagr and I see a direct parallel between the two.
Yeah. And he's, I didn't know if you mentioned this or not, the Triple Gold Club, Stanley Cup, Ice Hockey World Champions, and the Olympic Gold Medal. That's pretty outstanding.
Yeah,
That's
just
pretty
in spirit of, sorry, Jeff, in spirit of what you were talking about, Richard, the one thing, I don't know if you guys know about Jagr, is the Jaromir Jagrs, the guys who have been in different arenas. You see him if you look him up on YouTube. Every time he switched a team, there was a running sign where it said, okay, now we need a new friend. And it was the guys putting a mullet on, guys who would come to the rink. First, it was the Penguins, and I think it was the Capitals. And then it was the Rangers, and then I think I might have missed a team, but the Flyers, and then the Devils. He pretty much played for every Eastern Conference team. But the Jagrs, guys wearing 68 with the mullets would be in the crowd. And to your point, he has he laid the framework for like the guy who came from not America and became popular here, and that in turn turned a whole generation of North American kids onto hockey, present company included.
So despite the longevity of his career, did you say he played 30 years? How long did he?
I believe he played 20 years and change.
20 years and change.
He is still playing, by the way, at 48 in the Czech Republic.
For his
team that he owns.
Yeah,
which is wild. To me.
That's a guy that hates his personal life. He doesn't want to be he doesn't want to be at home. His kids he could do without.
I think he's got a little bit of a gambling challenge in his life too, so he's probably better to stay on the ice. That guy.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So guys, I don't know, one more round to try to catch up to the excellent choices from our guest Vincent Pagano. Michael and Richard, what do you have?
Okay, I think going back to kind of my entire thought process was this: is I wanted a guy or an athlete, well, it's a guy. I mean, I'm just going to flat out say it, who played a sport where the sport really hasn't changed much. And I guess that's why I was interested in Richard's choice of Pele, and was, kind of interested in Randy Johnson. But I thought of track and field, and I thought of the Olympics, and especially like the modern Olympics. And Carl Lewis was just a track star and was so dominant, but dominant with that sort of modern era, not quite flamboyance, but arrogance. I think a lot of us have watched like that Michael Jordan documentary recently, and he just knew that he was the best. And I think Carl Lewis had that same sort of feeling that he knew that he was the best while he was out there. But 9 Olympic gold medals in the long jump, back to back to back, in the 100 meter, in the relay, in the 200 meter. He was just like this phenomenal athlete that, if you were to plunk him down into any era of running or long jump or all the other different track and field events that he participated in, whether it was in the first Olympic Games or anywhere throughout the years of just being an athlete and runner, I think he would have been phenomenal. I mean, I was reading about him, and in 1984 he was drafted by the Bulls. Same year they drafted Michael, and also drafted by the Dallas Cowboys in the 7th round. And that just goes to show that people were just willing to take a flyer on and be like, hey, maybe he'll come play for us. Maybe he'll just be this tremendous athlete, and we can plug him in and do something with him, even though he really didn't play basketball, even though he didn't play football. They were just like, let's just get this incredible athlete on our team. And I think that's just I think that's a strange thing that a professional sports team would do. But then when you see, how good he was as an athlete, I think that speaks to it. Also named Sportsman of the Century. So, that's 100 years where Sports Illustrated considered him, he was maybe the best at his thing of anybody in the last 100 years.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, the Olympics from 79 to 90. No, his career span from 79 to 96. One of only 3 Olympic athletes who won a gold medal in the same individual event in 4 consecutive Olympic Games. It's amazing. A quarter century nearly of being.
I mean, I'd thought of Michael Phelps, who just feels like he feels like more he was like kind of freak of nature, born into it, whatever his body and training and everything. It seems like this guy's just such a one-off. But Carl Lewis felt like more of a pure athlete all around. He survived the whole. What was his name? Who was the Canadian, Richard?
Ben Johnson.
Yeah, he kind of survived that whole Ben Johnson, losing to Ben Johnson, and then kind of being kind of vindicated when Ben Johnson was tested positive for steroids or some sort of doping. Mm-hmm. Although I guess I read that he might have dabbled himself, but who knows?
Oh, that's a really fun choice. Although he was born in, I think, Alabama, he feels like a very L.A. kind of athlete. There's something very flashy in showbiz.
Yeah,
I think there's something. I think there's something something that really comes out of just that whole like 1984 Olympics, like the LA Olympics, really kind of codified, I think, a lot of people's images of like famous athletes, like 1984, the mid 80s in Los Angeles, just so kind of decadent with a John Williams fanfare. And I don't know. I think that was a very glamorous time. So I would understand that you think he might be.
Yeah. I guess I remember him either being parodied on SNL or being, I think Eddie Murphy might have done a comedic scenario about him in a stand-up routine or something like that. So, yeah, I think his flash and confidence. I also remember the first time even hearing the concept of positive mental outlook or positive imaging, hearing Carl Lewis say, "I ran the race already in my mind. Each step of the race I ran and I won." So the race itself was just academic after that, because mentally I had such a positive outlook about it, and his mental preparedness was something he espoused and gave credit to for some of his athletic success. And that's one of the first times I'd ever even heard that concept in any milieu, much less athletics.
I keep going back and thinking of Vince's first pick with LeBron James, and he feels like the only athlete on this list that could have played every sport we've been talking about. If he is like a person that would have dedicated himself as he did to basketball, it feels like he would have been an amazing football player, or he would have been like an amazing baseball player or an amazing soccer player. Like, he's the one athlete that it feels like, oh, he could have done literally everything on this list. I mean, can you imagine a 6'8" LeBron James as like NFL a sprinter?
Power hitter.
Yeah, or whatever, just being like the fastest in every possible category as long as he had committed to it. It seems like he's the only one that was possible for.
Richard, wow. I do have one question for you, Richard. How would you say Carl Lewis compares to Jesse Owens? If you, I don't know if you went that far into it, but
I don't know. That's tough. I think personality-wise, they probably couldn't be more different.
Right. Good point.
But performance-wise, and I think, Carl Lewis did it over a period of from 84 until, he
even before that, 1980 or so.
Yeah. So he was.
I mean, he was running, track events and whatever.
Yeah, right. He did. He won gold medal in 1996 in the long jump. So, I mean, his longevity, I think, is something that Jesse Owens did not have necessarily.
Right.
I think that's another interesting thing about kind of a lot of our choices is they're all long. They've all been players who have played their sport for a long time, be it Jagr, who's been in hockey for 30 years, or Wilt Chamberlain, who played from the 50s until the 70s. These are all like 20-year plus professionals. I'm sure LeBron's going to make it that far. And all these people have just like endured and been in their sport for a long time. And I think that speaks to the character of their role as a sportsman, is that not only have they dominated in their time, they probably dominated through different periods within their time, whether it was, for, I don't know how long a particular era of a sport is, but whether it's 10 years, some of these people have played in 2 or 3 different eras of their particular sport. And I think that is what is probably the most impressive, is that they've been able to adapt and change.
Hey guys, lots of great chat. Thank you so much for debating and deliberating the Mount Rushmore of athletes who would have excelled in any era of their sport. And I want to say that even though there's a tradition that the visitors come on the field and sometimes or often win against the home team, it is not a shallow exercise, a perfunctory exercise. It's something that the visitor has to earn, and our buddy Vince Pagano sure earned it. He had some really great choices. So I am going to choose now the choices that will go up on the Mount Rushmore for this. I want to start with Jaromir Jagr because I'd never heard the name before, and he seems like such a wonderful, colorful figure that was really, really dynamic and really interesting, and almost could go up with the second choice of Rickey Henderson in just kind of outsized persona and interesting personality. But then as far as a big persona goes, I would love to choose Randy Johnson from Richard and Michael because he's such a dynamic character. And you know what? It's going to be a tie. It's going to be a tie because I can't not pick Wilt Chamberlain because I'm a Jayhawk at heart. And so, Vince, you've come in and tied against these guys, so I really appreciate you doing it.
I hate to correct your scoring, Jeff, but Vince still won.
He did?
His back end picks. He picked up 7 points to our 3 points. So.
Oh, hey.
There you go.
All right. Thanks a lot.
I didn't receive the scoring chart beforehand, so I don't know how that is, but I'll have to get a copy of the card and maybe frame it like Rickey Henderson framed his $1 million check.
You did.
I'm sure you heard about that.
Yeah, you did well with the Russian judges. That was the most important.
Yeah.
They graded you highly.
When it came to track, I felt like Sergeant Schultz, like I know nothing. So
I know nothing.
I do appreciate the education on the Carl Lewis, who I think should be on there as well. The actual Mount Rushmore for the guy that was the athlete of the century, was it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and by far, I mean that has to go up there out of principle. Yeah. But again, I'm a man of principles. But it's your list, Jeff.
Well, thanks a lot, Vince Pagano. Really appreciate you, A, listening, B, make a suggestion, and C, coming on to the podcast to give your choices for that suggestion. So thanks so much. Here's our wrap-up. This has been the Mount Rushmore Show podcast. My name is always Jeff.
I'm Richard.
I'm Michael.